Still, stunning fall from grace for a company that went from the 7th largest in the U.S. to the largest ever bankruptcy filing.
They called it the American Dream, a company so powerful it was redefining the way business was done. But behind the glossy image of success lay a shocking web of lies, greed, and betrayal. This is the story of how Enron went from Wall Street's golden child to the biggest bankruptcy the world had ever seen, all orchestrated by one man who became a legend for all the wrong reasons. At the dawn of the 21st century, Enron was more than just a company. It was a symbol of the new American dream. With its glossy skyscrapers and promises of innovation, it embodied a future where corporations weren't just about profits, but about rewriting the rules of business itself. Enron wasn't just an energy company, it was a powerhouse of ideas, a trailblazer in energy trading, and a pioneer in technology-driven solutions. Investors adored it, Wall Street analysts sang its praises, and the media lauded it as a beacon of corporate excellence. But behind the grandeur lay an unsettling truth. Enron was never what it seemed. Its rise wasn't just meteoric, it was suspiciously fast, propelled by bold promises and even bolder deceptions. How did it become one of the most admired companies in America, only to collapse into one of the greatest corporate scandals in history? The story begins in 1985 when two regional energy companies merged to form Enron. Under the leadership of Kenneth Lay, the company quickly set its sights on revolutionizing the energy sector. Lay wasn't just a CEO, he was a visionary, someone who believed that Enron could become more than an energy supplier. His dream was to transform the company into a market leader in energy trading, using complex financial products to turn commodities like electricity and natural gas into tradable assets. By the 1990s, that dream seemed to be paying off. Enron's revenues skyrocketed as it expanded into new ventures, including broadband, water utilities, and even weather derivatives. The company positioned itself as the future of global business, a hybrid of Wall Street sophistication and Silicon Valley innovation. Its stocks soared, turning ordinary employees into paper millionaires and making executives like Lay and Jeffrey Skilling household names. From the outside, Enron was a juggernaut, a company that seemed to do no wrong. Business schools taught its strategies, politicians sought its advice, and investors clamored to be part of its success story. It wasn't just a company, it was a brand that promised prosperity, growth, and a brighter future for everyone involved. But there were cracks in the foundation. Beneath the polished facade were whispers of a different story, a tale of inflated earnings, opaque business practices, and a corporate culture that rewarded greed over ethics. Enron's meteoric rise wasn't built on solid ground, it was perched precariously atop a house of cards. And yet, no one could have predicted the scale of the disaster that was about to unfold. How did this golden child of corporate America fall so far, so fast? To understand, we need to go deeper into the minds of the men who built it and the decisions that destroyed it. This is the story of Enron, and it begins long before the world realized it was already on the path to ruin. Every empire begins with a visionary, and for Enron, that man was Kenneth Lay. To many, Lay seemed to embody the classic American success story. Born in 1942 in a small town in Missouri, Lay grew up in humble circumstances, the son of a Baptist minister. He wasn't born into wealth or privilege, but he was determined to make a name for himself. From an early age, he believed in the promise of hard work and the transformative power of free markets, a belief that would later define his career and, ultimately, his downfall. Lay excelled academically, earning a PhD in economics from the University of Houston. His sharp intellect and charisma quickly set him apart in the energy industry, where he began to climb the corporate ladder. By the late 1970s, he was making waves as an executive at Houston Natural Gas. Lay wasn't just a businessman, he was a salesman, someone who could inspire others with his grand vision of the future. He believed energy wasn't just a commodity, it was a cornerstone of civilization, and the way it was traded and distributed could change the world. In 1985, Lay orchestrated the merger of Houston Natural Gas and InterNorth to create Enron. The newly formed company wasn't an immediate success. It inherited debts, operational inefficiencies, and an uncertain future. But Lay had big plans. He envisioned Enron as a global leader, not just in the energy sector, but in entirely new markets. His ideas were bold and unconventional: energy trading, deregulated markets, and the use of complex financial instruments to monetize natural gas and electricity. Lay's vision was accompanied by a relentless drive. He surrounded himself with ambitious, like-minded executives, fostering a culture of innovation and risk-taking. Under his leadership, Enron rebranded itself as a cutting-edge company that wasn't afraid to disrupt traditional industries. Lay wasn't just leading a company, he was crafting a narrative, a story of progress, prosperity, and unlimited potential. He courted politicians, influencing energy policies that favored deregulation, and gave Enron room to experiment. He became a trusted figure in Washington, often seen shaking hands with presidents and legislators. For a time, it seemed Lay could do no wrong. But while Lay projected the image of a steady and ethical leader, the seeds of Enron's destruction were already being planted. Lay's confidence in his vision led to a culture of unchecked ambition, where success was measured not by sustainable growth, but by the ability to dazzle Wall Street with ever-increasing profits. Behind the scenes, Lay turned a blind eye to questionable practices as long as they delivered results. He trusted his executives, particularly Jeffrey Skilling, to turn his vision into reality, even when their methods became alarmingly opaque. Kenneth Lay wasn't just the founder of Enron, he was its beating heart. His charisma, ambition, and unshakable belief in free market capitalism propelled the company to dazzling heights. But his unwillingness, or inability, to confront the darker side of his empire would later be his undoing. Lay would go from being hailed as a visionary to being vilified as the architect of one of the greatest corporate scandals in history. The man who built Enron would ultimately watch it crumble, leaving a legacy that is as infamous as it is fascinating. If Kenneth Lay was the visionary behind Enron's rise, Jeffrey Skilling was the architect who designed its meteoric ascent, and ultimately, its catastrophic collapse. Skilling didn't just join Enron, he reshaped its DNA. He was brash, brilliant, and unapologetically ambitious, a man who believed in bending the rules of business to achieve unprecedented success. While Lay was the charismatic statesman, Skilling was the ruthless tactician who turned Enron into a high-stakes financial empire. But his revolutionary ideas would also prove to be its undoing. Skilling's path to Enron began in a more conventional way. Born in 1953, he was the son of a Midwestern salesman, a background that imbued him with a competitive edge and a relentless drive. Skilling excelled academically, earning his MBA from Harvard Business School, where he graduated in the top 5% of his class. Even then, he was known for his sharp intellect and ability to think unconventionally. He wasn't content with merely following established business practices, he wanted to redefine them. In 1990, Skilling joined Enron initially as the head of its trading division. This move would mark the beginning of a seismic shift in the company's operations. Skilling introduced a radical new strategy, mark-to-market accounting. Under this system, Enron could record projected future profits from contracts and deals as current earnings, even if the money wouldn't materialize for years, or at all. On paper, this made Enron look wildly successful, with revenues soaring year after year. But in reality, it was little more than financial smoke and mirrors. Skilling didn't just bring innovative accounting practices, he brought a new culture to Enron, one defined by aggression, competition, and a win-at-all-costs mentality. He famously implemented the rank and yank system, where employees were ruthlessly graded on performance, with the bottom 15% fired every year. This fostered a cutthroat environment where employees were incentivized to take risks, no matter how reckless, to stay at the top. Creativity and innovation flourished, but so did deception and greed. Under Skilling's leadership, Enron transformed from a traditional energy company into a trading juggernaut, dealing in everything from natural gas to broadband to weather derivatives. He had an uncanny ability to sell his vision, convincing investors, analysts, and even employees that Enron was invincible. His confidence bordered on arrogance, but it worked, at least for a time. By the late 1990s, Enron was America's darling, with its stock soaring to astronomical heights. But Skilling's brilliance was matched only by his hubris. As Enron's ventures became more complex and opaque, its financial practices became increasingly unsustainable. Losses were hidden in off-the-books entities, known as special purpose entities, SPES, designed to keep debt off Enron's balance sheet. These entities masked the company's growing financial troubles, but they also made the house of cards even more precarious. Skilling's aggressive push for growth and innovation left little room for caution or ethics. In 2001, at the height of Enron's apparent success, Skilling was promoted to CEO. His reign, however, was short-lived. Just 6 months later, he abruptly resigned, citing personal reasons. Behind the scenes, cracks were beginning to show. Enron's financial practices were under scrutiny, and the company's debt was becoming unmanageable. Skilling had built a machine that could dazzle Wall Street, but it couldn't withstand the weight of its own deceit. Jeffrey Skilling was the embodiment of Enron's rise and fall, a genius whose ideas propelled the company to unimaginable heights, but whose unchecked ambition and reckless innovation sowed the seeds of its destruction. Skilling believed he was building the future of business, but instead he created a blueprint for corporate disaster. His legacy, like Enron's, is a stark reminder of what happens when brilliance is blinded by greed. By the late 1990s, Enron was the darling of corporate America, a company that seemed to operate on a different level of genius. Headlines proclaimed it America's most innovative company, a title it held for 6 consecutive years according to Fortune magazine. From Wall Street to Main Street, everyone wanted a piece of Enron. Its stock price soared, reaching a staggering $90 per share in mid-2000, and its market capitalization peaked at over $70 billion. On paper, it was one of the largest and most successful companies in the world. But behind the scenes, much of Enron's success was an elaborate illusion, a masterclass in corporate theatrics designed to dazzle investors while concealing an unstable core. The company wasn't just selling energy, it was selling a narrative. Enron's executives, particularly Jeffrey Skilling and CFO Andrew Fastow, positioned the company as a pioneer in new markets like broadband, weather derivatives, and even bandwidth trading. These ventures sounded cutting-edge and futuristic, and they helped solidify Enron's reputation as an unstoppable innovator. Central to this illusion was the mark-to-market accounting system, a strategy Skilling championed. This allowed Enron to count projected future profits from deals as current revenue, even if those profits might never materialize. It turned risky contracts into instant financial gains on paper, creating the appearance of explosive growth. Meanwhile, debts and losses were quietly shuffled into special purpose entities, SPEs, opaque, off-the-books partnerships designed to keep the bad news hidden from shareholders and analysts. Enron's ability to manipulate its public image was unparalleled. The company hosted extravagant annual shareholder meetings, complete with light shows and slick presentations, to sell its vision of endless growth. Its charismatic leaders, including Kenneth Lay and Jeffrey Skilling, reassured investors with unwavering confidence, promising that Enron was poised to dominate the future of global business. Wall Street bought the story wholesale, with analysts issuing glowing recommendations and predicting even greater heights. For employees, the illusion was intoxicating. Many invested their life savings into Enron stock, convinced they were part of something extraordinary. Enron wasn't just a company, it was a movement, a symbol of innovation, ambition, and prosperity. But as the company reached its peak, the cracks in its foundation began to widen. Beneath the surface, the complex web of financial maneuvers holding Enron together was unraveling. The illusion of success was about to shatter, revealing a far darker reality that no one was prepared for. Enron's downfall didn't come all at once. It was a slow unraveling, a cascade of red flags that began to surface in the early 2000s. While the company maintained its facade of success, whispers of misconduct and financial irregularities began to grow louder. The first cracks in Enron's glittering empire were revealed not by its executives, but by a handful of brave individuals who refused to stay silent. One of the earliest and most critical voices of dissent came from Sharon Watkins, an Enron vice president who worked directly under Jeffrey Skilling and Andrew Fastow. Watkins began noticing glaring inconsistencies in Enron's financial statements and became alarmed by the company's growing reliance on special purpose entities, SPEs, the shadowy partnerships created by CFO Fastow. These entities were being used to hide Enron's mounting debts and inflate its profits, painting a far rosier financial picture than reality would allow. In the summer of 2001, just weeks after Jeffrey Skilling abruptly resigned as CEO, Watkins sent an anonymous letter to Kenneth Lay, warning him of the financial time bomb ticking beneath Enron's surface. She described the company as a house of cards that was dangerously close to collapsing. However, instead of addressing her concerns, Lay chose to deflect. He ordered an internal investigation but simultaneously doubled down on public reassurances that Enron was in excellent health. The whistleblower's warnings were ignored, setting the stage for an even greater disaster. Meanwhile, external scrutiny was beginning to mount. Financial analysts and journalists started to question Enron's unusually complex financial structures. One of the first public red flags came from Bethany McLean, a journalist for Fortune. In her now famous article, "Is Enron Overpriced?" McLean asked a simple yet damning question: how exactly does Enron make its money? Despite being a corporate giant, Enron's financials were so opaque that even seasoned analysts struggled to decipher them. Her article planted the first seeds of doubt on Wall Street. Another critical turning point came when Enron's stock price, which had soared to $90 per share, began to plummet. Investors were spooked by a series of quarterly earnings reports that didn't match Enron's lofty projections. Simultaneously, the role of Arthur Andersen, Enron's auditor, came under scrutiny. Andersen had not only signed off on Enron's dubious financial practices, but had also actively destroyed documents related to the company's accounting irregularities. As investigations deepened, federal agencies, including the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, launched inquiries into Enron's accounting practices. They uncovered a tangled web of fraud, including massive losses hidden in the SPEs and conflicts of interest involving Fasto, who personally profited from these entities. The revelations shocked Wall Street and the public, eroding the trust Enron had meticulously cultivated. By late 2001, the walls were closing in. Enron's stock was in free fall. Employees' retirement savings had evaporated, and the company's once pristine reputation was in tatters. It became clear that the very practices that had driven Enron's meteoric rise were now dragging it into a catastrophic collapse. The whistleblowers and investigative journalists who raised the alarm weren't just exposing financial mismanagement. They were pulling back the curtain on a culture of greed, deception, and hubris that had infected every level of Enron's leadership. Their bravery set the stage for one of the most infamous corporate scandals in history. A scandal that would change the way the world looked at big business forever. In late 2001, the empire Kenneth Lay and Jeffrey Skilling had built, one that symbolized corporate innovation and excess, came crashing down in a spectacular implosion. The Enron collapse wasn't just a business failure. It was a seismic event that reverberated across Wall Street, government institutions, and the lives of thousands of employees who lost everything. The fall of Enron exposed not only the fragility of unchecked ambition, but also the systemic flaws that allowed it to thrive. The unraveling reached a tipping point in October 2001 when Enron reported a $618 million quarterly loss, a shockingly steep decline for a company that had boasted record-breaking revenues just months earlier. Even more alarming, the company disclosed a $1.2 billion reduction in shareholder equity, tied to the off-the-books special purpose entities, SPEs, that CFO Andrew Fasto had orchestrated. This disclosure triggered an immediate loss of confidence among investors, and Enron's stock price, which had once traded at nearly $90 per share, began a free fall. What followed was a frantic scramble to keep the company afloat. Enron's executives sought emergency financing from banks and investment firms, but as the company's financial practices came under greater scrutiny, potential saviors backed away. Dynegy, a rival energy company, initially agreed to a merger that could have saved Enron, but upon reviewing the company's finances, they abruptly pulled out of the deal. Enron's problems were simply too massive, too opaque, and too toxic. As investigations intensified, it became evident that the company's collapse was no ordinary bankruptcy. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, uncovered layers of accounting fraud and self-dealing. Andrew Fasto's SPEs were revealed as elaborate schemes to hide debt and inflate profits, allowing executives to reap enormous bonuses while the company's true financial health deteriorated. Fasto had personally profited millions from these deals, while thousands of employees were left in financial ruin. The collapse wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal for Enron's workforce. Employees who had invested their life savings into Enron stock, encouraged by company leadership, saw their retirement accounts wiped out as the stock price plunged to mere cents. Meanwhile, top executives cashed out millions in stock options before the full extent of the company's troubles became public. The betrayal left a bitter legacy, with many employees losing not only their jobs, but also their sense of security and trust in corporate America. By December 2, 2001, Enron officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, marking the largest corporate bankruptcy in U.S. history at the time. The once dominant energy giant was now a symbol of greed, hubris, and failure. The fallout extended beyond Enron's offices. Arthur Andersen, Enron's longtime auditor, faced criminal charges for its role in the scandal, including the shredding of critical documents. The accounting firm, one of the Big Five, was convicted of obstruction of justice and dissolved shortly thereafter, sending shockwaves through the accounting world. Enron's collapse wasn't just the failure of one company. It exposed systemic flaws in corporate governance, accounting practices, and regulatory oversight. In its wake, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 was passed, introducing stricter rules for corporate transparency and accountability. Yet, for many, these reforms came too late. The fall of Enron serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked ambition, coupled with a lack of ethical boundaries, can lead even the most admired institutions to ruin. It wasn't just a financial collapse. It was a collapse of trust, leaving a legacy of skepticism and reform in the world of big business. Enron's story, from its dazzling rise to its devastating fall, remains one of the most infamous corporate scandals in history. The collapse of Enron was just the beginning of a legal and ethical reckoning that would shake the corporate world to its core. Once the dust settled, investigators, prosecutors, and the public turned their attention to the people responsible for the most infamous corporate scandal in history. The ensuing trials exposed not only Enron's fraudulent practices, but also the moral failings of those at the top, culminating in dramatic courtroom battles and harsh consequences for its leadership. At the center of the storm were Kenneth Lay, Enron's founder, and Jeffrey Skilling, the company's former CEO. Both men faced federal charges for conspiracy, securities fraud, and insider trading. Prosecutors allege that Lay and Skilling knowingly deceived investors by hiding Enron's true financial condition while enriching themselves in the process. The trials became a media spectacle, with testimony revealing the intricate web of deceit behind Enron's rise and fall. The case against Lay was especially damning. Once hailed as a corporate visionary, Lay was portrayed as a leader who ignored numerous red flags and enabled a culture of unchecked greed. He maintained his innocence throughout, claiming he was unaware of the company's fraudulent activities. However, emails and internal documents painted a different picture, showing Lay was deeply involved in Enron's financial manipulation. Skilling, meanwhile, was unapologetically defiant. Known for his sharp intellect and arrogance, he dismissed accusations of wrongdoing and insisted that Enron's collapse was due to market forces, not fraud. But prosecutors argued that Skilling's aggressive leadership and reliance on mark-to-market accounting were key drivers of the scandal. In 2006, after a lengthy trial, Skilling was found guilty on 19 counts of fraud, insider trading, and conspiracy, and sentenced to 24 years in prison. His sentence was later reduced to 14 years, and he was released in 2019. Kenneth Lay's trial ended abruptly when he died of a heart attack in July 2006, just weeks after being convicted on 6 counts of fraud and conspiracy. His death meant that his convictions were vacated, leaving many to feel justice had been left incomplete. The fallout didn't stop with Enron's executives. Andrew Fastow, the CFO who masterminded the off-the-books special purpose entities SPES, struck a plea deal in exchange for cooperating with prosecutors. He admitted to conspiracy charges and served 6 years in prison, becoming a central figure in unraveling Enron's financial schemes. The scandal also destroyed Arthur Andersen, Enron's auditor. Convicted of obstruction of justice for shredding Enron-related documents, the firm collapsed, leaving tens of thousands of employees jobless. Although the conviction was later overturned by the Supreme Court, the damage to Andersen's reputation was irreversible. The Enron trials marked a watershed moment in corporate accountability. Public outrage over the scandal spurred Congress to pass the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, introducing stricter regulations for financial reporting and corporate governance. While these reforms sought to prevent future corporate fraud, Enron's legacy remains a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked greed and ethical lapses. The trials brought a sense of closure to the public, but for the employees, shareholders, and communities devastated by Enron's collapse, the scars of betrayal lingered long after the gavel fell. The fall of Enron left an indelible mark on the corporate world, serving as both a cautionary tale and a catalyst for change. It exposed the dangers of unchecked greed, corporate arrogance, and the lack of oversight in financial markets. But while the scandal sparked immediate reforms and a collective soul-searching within the business community, its legacy raises the uncomfortable question, did we truly learn from Enron? In the immediate aftermath, the U.S. government took decisive action to prevent another corporate catastrophe. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 was introduced to improve corporate transparency and accountability. It required CEOs and CFOs to personally certify the accuracy of financial reports, impose stricter penalties for fraud, and mandated internal controls to prevent accounting manipulation. Public companies were subjected to more rigorous audits, and whistleblowers received legal protections to encourage reporting of unethical behavior. For a time, it seemed that the lessons of Enron had been internalized. Corporate governance became a priority, and investors demanded greater accountability from executives. Business schools incorporated Enron into their ethics curricula, presenting it as a textbook case of what happens when profits are prioritized over principles. Yet, as the years passed, the outrage faded and old habits crept back into the system. The global financial crisis of 2008 revealed that many of the same reckless behaviors Enron had exemplified, opaque financial practices, excessive risk-taking, and moral hazard, were alive and well in other industries. Institutions deemed too big to fail imploded, triggering economic devastation that dwarfed Enron's collapse. The echoes of Enron could be heard in the housing bubble, the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, and the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. Enron's legacy remains a paradox. On one hand, it stands as a warning about the dangers of corporate excess, a story that continues to inspire regulatory reforms and serve as a benchmark for corporate ethics. On the other hand, it's a reminder of how quickly society forgets. For every lesson learned, there's a tendency to believe it won't happen again, until it inevitably does. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of Enron is the importance of vigilance. The mechanisms for accountability exist, but they are only as effective as the people willing to enforce them. The question isn't just whether we learned from Enron, but whether we'll have the foresight to apply those lessons when the next crisis emerges. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that greed, hubris, and the desire for more will always find new ways to test our systems and our values. If you found this video enlightening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps the channel grow. Click the next video for an even more intriguing untold story from the world of finance. See you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.